The Lincoln Project is an organization that we haven't spoken about really on this show at all. And there's been a lot of murmuring there that there was an individual by the name of John Weaver, who is a part of the Lincoln Project, who is sort of under a lot of investigation at the current moment for malfeasance with young boys, with young men, right? Not a good situation for the Lincoln Project as an organization. Certainly not a good situation for any of the boys who were the subject of John Weaver's alleged maneuvering with them, and certainly not good for John Weaver either. Now, the Lincoln Project is one of these organizations that kind of didn't really have a home, or had a home for a little bit, and it feels like because the politics have shifted that they're sort of in the wilderness yet again. So the Lincoln Project, from my understanding of them, they sort of came out as a bunch of never Trumpers, never Trump, and they raised a bunch of money. I know a lot of Hollywood figures were helping fund them. They have a big presence, and they did everything that they could to make sure Trump didn't win and that Joe Biden would win. And then suddenly, after that all happened, well, now they're kind of off on their own again. They're sort of outside of the envelope of protection. Apparently, some of these stories have been known since March, as early as March, even later than that, back in May. And there were some allegations that they were sort of covering up these sexual improprieties of John Weaver. And it's not just underage people; it's people who are 14 years old, young boys who are 14. And so that is obviously abhorrent behavior. And we want to go through this story. Now, the reason we haven't talked about it thus far is because it was a lot of rumor, right? It was a lot of rumors floating around, but there is a standard here that a lot of prosecutors will use when it comes to charging people with crimes. And so my question is, my frame here is John Weaver going to be charged with a crime? Is this going to be federally investigated by the FBI, by local law enforcement? Because now we have two underage victims who have come out and claimed that they were the subject of John Weaver's abuse. In criminal law, in prosecutions, a lot of the time prosecutors, they don't actually reveal sort of what their charging decisions are, some of them. But the question would be, are they going to charge him because now there's two? So oftentimes what will happen in sex crime prosecution is there will be one person who files a complaint against another person, typically female, filing a complaint against the man, calling the police against the man, and saying, this person sexually assaulted me. And the police will come up, they'll take reports. If the situation is legitimate and the police do their due diligence in their investigation, they'll just move forward with arresting that person then and there. But oftentimes what happens in sexual assault cases is they'll make that claim 30 days later, sometimes 6 months later. Oh, hey, I needed to think through some things. I needed to talk to my counselor. I'm finally healed. I'm finally in a position where I'm going to come forward with the claims against this person. And it happens 6 months later, a year later. And then the police will go, all right, well, it kind of makes our job hard to investigate this crime that you said happened a year ago or 6 months ago. We can't do any physical samples. We can't just get any evidence that we would need to corroborate your claims. And so those cases will sort of hang on the back burner for some period of time. And sometimes, years and years. And what will happen then is if the police, if the prosecutor's office, if they get another complaint from another similarly situated individual where they are, same type of claim. So this is, 5 years later, another woman makes another claim against that guy in a similar fashion. He also picked you up from a bar. Oh, he also took you home. Oh, you also did this. You also did that. Okay. Now we have two things that look like happened in a pattern. We can identify that pattern. We now have two witnesses, two victims who will now come and testify against this person. So the he said, she said stuff that would only be prevalent in a one situation case where it's only one victim. We kind of have two of them now. And so for a typical defense from a defense attorney would be like, no, it was totally consensual. She has buyer's remorse. This is something that is illegitimate and you have no evidence. So the case can't be brought. But now if you got two people and they're corroborating each one of their story, it's a stronger case. Magnify that by 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now you have a very strong pattern, and that's much harder for a defense attorney to rebut. So the question here is, now that there are two victims, we have a second underage victim in the Lincoln Project's John Weaver's scandal, is this going to lead to criminal charges? And we can run through what some of these might look like. So the independent reporter who broke the story of sexual harassment and the grooming of young boys, Ryan Gerdusky, he appeared on Laura Ingraham Monday night to report even more disturbing information about the Lincoln Project's John Weaver. As the New York Times reported, more than 24 young men reported that John Weaver had sent them sexual texts and messages engaged in, quote, grooming behavior, and intimated that he would help them with their political careers if they had sex with him. The youngest victim was 14 when Weaver sent him the sexual messages. Weaver's co-founders and the Lincoln Project itself mostly ignored the scandal until the Times report published. But once it was known that Weaver had creeped on 14-year-olds, they were suddenly repulsed by his behavior, as if they didn't know before then. According to Gidersky's report, the incident wasn't a one-off. Another young man, who's still a minor at this time, contacted Gidersky and shared that John Weaver had sexually harassed him. The young man does not want his name to be used, Gidersky said, but Gidersky has reviewed the communications between Weaver and the young man itself, right? And so, pretty disgusting behavior, still allegations at this point in time. And you got to remember, in this country, even though people get hit with very disgusting allegations, they are still innocent until proven guilty. And so we want to confirm that, right? John Weaver hasn't been convicted of anything yet. But the bigger sort of question is, is there any sort of, enablement that was taking place from the Lincoln Project? Were there any people who were sort of keeping this stuff all hush-hush under the rug for political reasons? And it would be very curious to know if there were other reports being made to law enforcement that were not acted upon for some reason until now, right? What happened here? Why was this allowed to go on for so long? And if this was something that had been sort of percolating out there as a part of the Lincoln Project for a long period of time, why? How did that happen? And was John Weaver still allowed to go out there and do what he was doing? Okay, I know people, or not know them, but my law firm has represented people who have been arrested and charged with crimes for conduct similar to this, less than this. Okay, much less than this. So the question is John Weaver going to be charged with a crime, or are his political connections, was he on the right side of this, I would say, justice environment? So the Lincoln Project came back out and they published this today. The Lincoln Project has retained the law firm of Paul Hastings to investigate the allegations of inappropriate behavior by John Weaver as part of a comprehensive review of our operations and culture. The review process is currently underway, and they say here, we are committed to create a positive, diverse, inclusive workplace environment at the Lincoln Project, and inappropriate behavior by anyone associated with the organization will not be tolerated under any circumstances. We have already taken decisive action to address internal concerns. Additionally, we are releasing staff and former staff from the confidentiality provisions in their employment agreements to discuss their workplace environment. Based on the findings of this review, we will take all necessary action to correct any issues or deficiencies that are identified. So that's good. So people can now go in and talk about this, which is good. Concurrently, we're also working with outside counsel and professional consultants to strengthen our corporate governments and lean into our important mission of advancing democracy. The Lincoln Project is founded to combat political forces who seek to undermine our democracy. We revolutionized how political action committees operate and spent $81 million this last election cycle to create and place more than 300 advertisements, host national town halls, conduct voter outreach, launch a podcast and streaming video network that engaged millions of voters. 80% of our funds went to voter content production. Our historic results speak for themselves. Moving forward, we have important work ahead of us. We've created a nationwide movement of Americans who support our objectives. In order to continue fulfilling our promise to our millions of supporters and contributors, we must address any and all internal organizational issues immediately and put in place a governance and diverse leadership structure that reflects our core values. We'll continue producing and distributing popular content and commentary while these reviews are being conducted, paid for by the Lincoln Project. So I can't say that I've ever seen much of anything from the Lincoln Project, but I don't follow them. Apparently they produce a lot of content. I don't know if it's any good. I haven't seen it. But all right, let's take a look at some potential charges that can be floated about. We've got 18 U.S. Code 2423, the transportation of minors. So if he's just text messaging them, and this wouldn't apply, but any person who knowingly transports an individual who has not attained the age of 18 years in interstate or foreign commerce, or in any Commonwealth, territory, or possession of the United States with intent that the individual engaged in prostitution, it doesn't have to be prostitution, or in any sexual activity for which any person can be charged with a criminal offense, shall be fined under this title and imprisoned for not less than 10 years or for life. So if this was a situation where people were being transported across state lines and they were engaged in sex and they were under 18, 18 U.S. Code 2423. there's also a section under coercion and enticement. Whoever knowingly persuades, induces, entices, or coerces any individual to travel in interstate or foreign commerce, to engage in prostitution or any sexual activity, or attempts to do so, shall be fined or imprisoned for not more than 20 years. So coercion and enticement. Okay, that's just for adults as well. Then we get over to aggravated sexual abuse. Whoever crosses the state line with the intent to engage in a sexual act with a person who has not attained the age of 12 years, or in this case, has not attained the age of 12 years, but has not attained the age of, who has attained the age of 12 years, but who has not attained the age of 16 years, and is at least 4 years younger than the person or so engaging, shall be fined and imprisoned for not less than 30 years or for life. So if you're between the ages of 12 and 16 and you're at least 4 years older than the victim, there's a 4 years difference there, you shall be fined and imprisoned for not less than 30 years. Big charge. Then we also have 18 U.S. Code 2243, sexual abuse of a minor or a ward of a minor. Whoever in the United States knowingly engages in a sex act with another person who has attained the age of 12 years but has not attained the age of 16 years and is at least 4 years younger than the person so engaging can be convicted of that. Sexual abuse of a minor. Defense is a prosecution. Under this, it is a defense which the defendant must establish by preponderance of the evidence that the defendant reasonably believed that the other person had attained the age of 16 years. All right, so he could probably make that defense. 14's somewhat close to 16. Not sure if he was checking driver's license or whatever. In a prosecution under this section, it is a defense which the defendant must establish by preponderance of the evidence that the person engaging in the sex act or at the time married to each other. So John Weaver wasn't married to those people. And it says here, the government does not need to prove that the defendant knew the age of the person or that the requisite age difference existed. So this is called a sort of a strict liability crime. It doesn't really matter what you know. If they're underage, they're underage. Doesn't matter if you knew it or not. Doesn't matter if you thought she was 21. Okay. Strict liability. You did it. You're responsible for it. And you see this in a lot of sex crimes throughout the country. Very, very strict policies surrounding those for good reason. So the question here will be, well, is anything going to happen to John Weaver? I certainly believe in due process. I certainly believe in the presumption of innocence. We'll see where it goes. I just would like to make sure that it is getting the proper scrutiny, because often what happens in our justice system is certain people get prosecuted, other people do not. Justice should be blind, and it should treat everybody the same, regardless of your political connections or who you help get elected. So we'll see where that goes.